What's up, y'all? This is Dominic with PoorPumperSociety, and I'm here with Godina Septic's very own John Ibarra. Now, John is a pro with everything relating to LPDs, LPPs, aerobic systems. So anytime I have a question with any system I run into, he's the guy I call. And he's going to show us how to replace an effluent pump. So this was the old effluent pump on this system. You can see it has seen better days. It has lived up to its full lifespan and it's time to be replaced. And we are replacing it with an aider pump. And this is going to be from Wholesale Septic. They supply the pump, and we also have these floats. Now, these are going to be a high water alarm float, and there's also going to be the float that kicks on the pump. So these are going to be set up on the pole to certain depth. So once the effluent in the tank reaches a certain point, it's going to flip this and it's going to kick on that pump. That way it can pump it out to the drain field. If the water level in the pump tank ever reaches this float, it's going to sound the alarm to the panel box and let the homeowner know that there's a problem and it needs to be looked at. All right, now, so John, what will cause this pump to give out, and what can the homeowner do to make sure they get the full lifespan out of this effluent pump?
Okay, well, in this scenario, this is a hybrid system for this homeowner, meaning we actually have an aerobic treatment unit. This is a 3-tank system. You have your 1-compartment trash tank, your 3-chambered aerobic system, which consists of a pre-treatment chamber, your treatment chamber with the aerator. In this case, it's going to be a shaft aerator, and then what we would call the clarification tank. On this particular aerobic system, it actually has a biokinetic filter, so it basically just acts as a housing for the bacteria. And then the final stage, after everything's been treated, it goes into the pump tank where the 20 series aider pump will go into. But as far as what affects the lifespan on these pumps, like you've said in your videos, it's very important to stay on top of the frequent pump outs. No matter how many chambers you have or how many tanks you have, eventually in the pump tank, you're going to have some sediments.
Right.
And those sediments do tend to build up at the bottom. A lot of these tanks, or a lot of these pumps, have been placed on a paver stone or cinder block to get them above the bottom of the tank. Mm-hmm. As sure as you know, when you pump them out, you'll see that block down there.
Right.
And that just tells you that there is sediments that go down at the bottom of the tank. So if those sediments starts to build up in your pump or on your pump tank at the bottom, that's eventually going to go up into the pump and into the field. In this case, the old field is an LPD, or in other states an LPP. If those lines start getting clogged, well, your pump's going to start having to work harder.
Right.
Right. So just like your vehicles, you don't clean your air filter, it's going to, your engine is just starving for oxygen. You don't clean your fuel filter, it's just starving for fuel. Your oil, you don't change your oil, she's just going to go out on you. So very important on routine pump outs. I've pulled out pumps before that they were the original pump on a house 20, 25 years old. And it's more than likely due because people are doing what they're supposed to be doing, which is pumping out their systems frequently.
Right.
Every 3 to 5 years, longer if it's maybe a single, maybe a couple. Shorter spans if it's a full house, 2 adults and 5 kids or whatever, or in-laws. So very important to pump out your systems. It's going to increase the longevity of your pumps. But yeah, so the main culprit on these guys is going to be just negligence. So, and the reason we're going away from an effluent pump or sewage pump is the homeowner is actually going to abandon the LPP style drain field, right? Which is perforated 1-inch pipe and gravel, and they're going to put in AstroTurf. Right. So in this scenario, they actually had not only did they already have the aerobic system in place, which is going to save them a lot of time and money, they also have the appropriate land acreage. So if they hadn't had the land to do what we're doing, then unfortunately they probably wouldn't have been able to install the AstroTurf. Right. But luckily they've got enough space, so we're keeping the same tanks, and we're actually installing drip field down at the bottom there. So that field will be abandoned, and now it's just going to go drip field. So on an LPD system, you're not going to necessarily see these effluent pumps. These are going to be most commonly on aerobic drip systems or aerobic spray systems. Okay. And then the pump you see there, the big guy, you're going to see them on LPDs or LPPs. But the most common reason they go out is negligence. So just stay on top of your pump outs, and you know, you can get 20, 25 years out of your pumps.
There you have it from the man himself. And I'm telling you, I've seen some of these. A lot of times, if you have an LPD, people will bury all the chambers. But when you have an aerobic system, you're kind of forced, pretty much in the state of Texas, you have to have quarterly inspections to make sure that everything's working properly. Because if it's not, say you have a spray system, you're spraying raw sewage, and your neighbors are not going to like that. Now, this drip system is going to be a subsurface irrigation, so it's going to go below the soil, but it's still important that it's properly treated through the aeration process and that it passes through the biokinetic filter before it is pumped out to the drain field. So we're going to get this pump installed, and hopefully it will have a long and plentiful life. And if the homeowner stays on top of their maintenance, it should last a very long time.
So I'm not using, I don't use pipe dope so much as a sealant. I'm using it almost as an anti-seize. So because I've in the past when I take pumps out, either they've gone out or I've got to replace them for any reason. It's nice to be able to use the pipe stand, right? It's still in good condition. And if you don't put pipe dope, this adapter can seize on there, and you're having to rebuild the whole pipe stand again. So again, I'm not using pipe dope as a sealant. I'm using it almost as an anti-seize, kind of like what you would do on spark plugs on a vehicle. Now this aider is it's a bottom suction. So depending on the system, the engineer or the designer can specify either a bottom suction pump or a mid suction pump. For this application, they specified a 1/2 horsepower 20 series bottom suction. So as I mentioned earlier, in the pump tank, regardless if it's conventional or gravity, LPD, LPP, or an aerobic, in the pump tank you're always going to have settlements. And with the screen being so low to the bottom, what we like to use is a scrap piece of 3-inch PVC. And on these aider pumps, you can see that there's this stand, and you can actually fit a 3-inch pipe in there pretty nicely. And so what we actually do is just use stainless steel screws to affix this guy on there. And it keeps the bottom suction a little higher off the bottom of the tank, in case there's ever some, you know, heavy sludge at the bottom. I got primer on my lips.
Oh,
That's not good.
what are you marking right there?
So every system, the designer or engineer will actually specify when he wants the pump to turn off and on. So on this system, the engineer specified that the off setting be at 8 inches from the bottom of the pump, and the on setting should be 12 inches from the bottom of the pump. So here's my 8-inch mark and my 12-inch mark. These aiders have a 4-inch mechanical float. It's a 4-inch mechanical float.
Yep.
So that means it's got to travel 4 inches for it to actually to turn on.
Okay.
So if you're ever having to replace one on an existing system and you can't find the plans, I would usually just match it to where the other ones were. But if you can pull plans, obviously try to pull plans and match it to what the plans specify.
Right.
Because a lot of times you'll pull up these pumps and the floats will actually be affixed up here, which it's okay. It's not going to affect anything. But because of this one's a brand new one, they're gonna inspect it. More than likely they'll ask us to pull out the pump during inspection, and they'll actually measure that the floats match the settings for the design. My go-to when putting these floats in is electrical tape. Sometimes you can find metal stainless steel hose clamps with a little plastic bracket that holds the float in place. We've kind of learned that over time those fall off. So what can happen is that little plastic bracket can fall off, and then your floats are just dangling right in there. So we have found electrical tape is our go-to. It seems to last forever. You can see on this old pump, I mean, the electrical tape is still there. Oh, here's a hose clamp we were talking about. So a lot of times either this can rust and fall off, or this bracket right here can fall off. But you can see the electrical tape is still in good shape, so I mean, it lasts forever. I like to wrap my wires as I go up. Kind of keep them out of the way.
Make it nice and neat.
Yeah. And as you can see, when I install my floats, I basically make sure my wires are kind of in line with the pump wires. Otherwise, if you place on this side, you've got it wrapped around. I mean, it doesn't make any difference, but that's kind of just my thing, what I do.
Right.
Keeps everything nice and neat. Now, this is going to be our alarm float. Like you said earlier, this is going to turn on your pump so water level rises. The best way to think about it is they're like light switches, right? You want to turn your lights on in your hallway, you flip the switch up, and that's basically what you're doing. You're opening the circuit, closing the circuit. When we do high water alarm floats, the best practice is to do it as low as possible, but don't go so low that when the pump float turns on, it's also going to activate your alarm float. We've seen that in the past, and so we've got customers call us to say, my alarm goes on and off every day, and we'll pull up the pump, and what they've done is they've done this, right? So the pump turns on, and it turns on the alarm, the water goes down, and the alarm goes off. So what I like to do is I like to raise mine all the way to the top, and then have that alarm float pretty much like that. So no matter how much give it goes, it's not gonna activate the alarm. But you also don't want to go so high that the customer doesn't get the alarm until it's too late and there's too much water in the septic system. So you do want an early warning, right? So that's why we go, the lower the better. Because we've pulled some pumps up before, we've gotten some high water alarms, and they put the float up here. Well, if this is the top of your lid, by that time it's probably too late. You need an emergency pump out. But if you go down here, if your pump fails or the alarm or the float fails, you get your alarm at an early warning, right? And speaking of floats failing, these Aider floats, they come with a 5-year warranty. So you can get them from Wholesale Septic. We order them by the bulk. So that's all we use now. But yeah, 5-year warranty on a mechanical float, that's pretty good. And these Aider 20 series are 2 years on the pumps. So, but 5 years on the float, that's not bad. Oh, one thing also on the alarm floats, you don't want your tether to be so loose. I've seen that also before, that the water level has to travel this much for it to activate your alarm. Again, you want the alarm to go off at the soonest possible, just so you get that early warning. So I usually go 3 fingers, and that's plenty. So you want to limit the travel of that float. All right. So that's pretty much the setup there. Now, if the plants specify, some plants specify an override float. This one doesn't. But basically, you're adding another float in case this float fails. You have another one that's going to activate the alarm, and it's going to bypass the timer. This system doesn't require one, but if it did, we would just get another Aider float and put it on our stand. So as you can see, I haven't taped all the way up. I cut my 1-inch pipe stand longer than I need it. You can always take away, but you can't always add more, right? Unless you want to go through couplings. But right now we're just going to do a dry fit. Set it down there. And then no matter your tank depth, some pump tanks are really deep, some are really shallow, but no matter what, you don't want to tape your wires to the point to where when you come back to take the pump out, I'm sure you've pulled out pumps before, but they always tape them, like, let's say they tape it here, and they don't give you enough slack, so as you're going, the pump stops there. So you're having to hold the pump, get your knife, cut off the electrical tape, or if it's got the stainless steel hose clamp, you got to unscrew that. Kind of go as you go. So, well, as you can see, we got plenty of wire. So I'm gonna leave my pump down there for now. All right, so this is my alarm. This is nice, but always put an A there, just so you don't get it mixed up. If you don't have, if the tag accidentally falls off, you can always get yellow electrical tape or green, any other color, and then just write on there if you need to. P for pump. All right, and the first guy I like to go ahead and wire up is going to be the alarm float. Let's just go ahead and get that guy out of the way. I like to give myself a lot of extra slack, not only for myself if I ever have to come back and do any electrical work here, but also the guy, you know, if it's not me, the other guy. I've come across other other junction boxes, you know, the previous electrician gave you a lot of slack, and it's always kind of nice. I'm sure you've seen where it's down to here.
Yeah,
and
just the nub.
Oh, yeah, just the nub, and you're sitting there. I mean, it just makes it so much harder. So it's really nice when you give yourself a lot of slack. And I just want to make sure, you know, I usually on these junction boxes go down to the bottom until I touch, and that tells me I've got plenty of slack. So in case you ever have to cut, I mean, you can keep cutting back for a while. Wire strippers. Got my alarm float here. Now that takes some practice. After a while, you can get used to scoring the casing without actually cutting the wire. But at a hardware store, you can actually get a tool that you can actually run through the casing, and it'll cut the casing for you. But I've had plenty of practice, so I've gotten pretty good at it. All right, so when you wire the float, it doesn't really matter which one you tie on which one you tie onto first, whether it's black on black or black on white. Your alarm float is just basically a switch. So all you're doing is closing the circuit so you can activate the alarm. But if you just want to keep things straightforward, just go black to black. Your other wire to your white, to your now we like using, even though all these wire connections are going to be in a watertight junction box, I still like using grease-filled wire nuts. You can order these online or go to your local septic supplier, and they may have them. Home Depot, Lowe's, but they're just grease-filled wire nuts. It just keeps it, just in case there's any moisture that does get into the box, it'll keep that connection nice and watertight. Push everything down. And when you tighten these up, the little rubber gasket inside will compress, and as long as it's nice and snug, you're good to go. So now I'll pull my wire to the pump float. And then the wires for the pump. for some new ones. All right, so on this type of panel, you do have to pull an extra wire, one extra wire. 2 wires for the pump float, and then your 3 wires for the pump. So the wiring on this type of system is going to be pretty simple. Your pump float goes to these 2, and your pump goes to these 3, and all you got to do is color match. On these, it doesn't really matter. It's just your pump float, so you can just whichever color you actually end up pulling through. On other panels, you would actually have to tie in your pump float to the pump inside the junction box, and you run 1 wire to an override float or the pump test switch if it calls for it. And on those systems, what I like to do is, I can show you here, I want to go ahead and tie on the wires that I know I don't have to jump, if that makes any sense. So your pump neutral obviously goes to your pump neutral from the panel, which is the white. And obviously your green is your ground. So now you've eliminated those 2, so you don't have to worry about those. This is your incoming hot from the panel. You don't want to go straight to the pump, otherwise your pump's just going to run constantly. So what you would actually want to do is you get your hot to your pump float. Just like that. Now remember, your pump float is just like a light switch, right? All you're doing is closing the circuit. You're getting the current from one point to the pump. So that's your pump, right? So power your incoming hot to the pump float, and then your white wire from the float to the black on your pump. That's basically it. Now, if you had to pull an override float, or let's say a pump test wire, then you would just tie this one to your pump hot, which is this guy here, like so. But on this system, we're not doing that. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to disconnect my hot from the float, and connect my pump float to my 2 pump float designated wires. She's going to be And since I've already connected my neutral to my neutral, my ground to my ground, all that's left to do is connect my incoming hot to my pump. Now the reason I'm able to do this is because on this panel, the panel actually has a computer inside of it. So the computer is going off not only off the timer, but it's reading the current from the pump float So you're not having to wire everything together or connect everything from one point to the other on this type of system. You can actually just connect everything from here. Just cut off any excess. All right, I've got all my wire nuts. Just give them a nice little tug. Just make sure everything's on there secure. All this extra wire, you have to finesse these wires in there, but trust me, if you ever have to come back, you're going to be glad you gave yourself extra slack or extra wire. And if it's not you, the other guy's going to be glad you did this as well. Like that. All right. So you're always going to have condensation in these tanks. I'm sure you know when you open these tanks, the safety pans or the dome lids themselves and everything here has just got condensation on it. What I like to do is, even though these boxes are rated for wet locations, I've found that these screws may not always be stainless steel, so they do tend to rust. And what I've found to work for me is just dielectric grease. This you can also use in case you can't get a hold of these grease-filled wire nuts. You can always get dielectric grease and just get, you know, your standard brand wire nuts and fill them in and do that for your wire connections. But what I like to do is put some on the top. Like that. And it'll keep those screws from rusting. Because I've found, you know, you come and do a pump replacement and it's got a junction box, and sure, the box was you know, ready for wet location, but these guys will rust out, and so what you're doing is you actually end up breaking the heads, and so now you've got a junction box you can't use because you've got the screws, you have your screws stuck in the junction box, and now you're replacing the junction box. So I've actually found this to work. I'm still, you know, I've been doing this for 5 years now, and if I ever have to go back either to replace a float or replace the pump, I found my junction boxes with still the grease on there and the screws still good as new. So that's kind of just what I like to do. Some people might not agree with that, but I've just found that works out for me. All right, so once I have my pump wired and the floats wired, well, what I like to do is I'll pull the pump out and kind of work my way down. And I'll place it at the highest point of the pump tank, and in this case it's going to be this toughed out riser. And what that's going to tell me is that I can actually tape my wires up to this point, and I don't go any higher than that. And the reason being is if I ever have to come work on this pump or somebody has to work on it, if I go any higher, let's say I wrap my wires at this location and it's taped up here, this is as far as I can get the pump. Makes it a lot harder. So especially on the heavier ones, these aren't so bad, but you still gotta hope you have your pocket knife with you. If not, then you gotta put everything back and look for your knife and then cut the electrical tape as you go. But at least this way, I know that if I ever come back, I can pull the pump all the way out and I have enough slack to get it out. So. And as for these wires, you don't ever want to let them dangle down at the bottom. If you do, your pump floats could snag. If you have any loops at the bottom or just free hanging wire, your floats, when they activate, they can get stuck on that wire, and they just never, your pump will never turn off, or the alarm will never turn off. So I like to loop as I go down. Again, trust the electrical tape. And kind of just do that. Later on, we're actually going to put in a 90 and actually route this supply line through the headworks for the aerobic system. So here's, in this little spot's going to have the filter, the vacuum breakers, check valves, ball valves, everything in here. So at this point I can leave the pump in this position. And once we have that pipe with the union, I'll basically just tape this to that union, and that's kind of just our go-to method. So that way these wires don't fall down at the bottom. So for right now, I could just leave that there.
All right, so John showed us how to replace this old, out of commission effluent pump with this brand new Aider pump from Wholesale Septic. Now all that's left to do is to install the panel box, and then it's pretty much connect the wires at that point, and this effluent pump will be up and running. Now I also want to give a special shout out to John for walking us through this pump installation. He's a pro, and hopefully his tips from working 5 years installing these things will help you later on. I really liked the fact that he was adding slack and thinking of what's going to happen in the future. A lot of people don't think about the future, especially when you're having to maintain, replace these pumps. It really helps if somebody has the foresight to give you that assistance needed. So you see everything's all nice and neat inside of this box right here. So if there were ever an instance where a float need to be replaced, a pump need to be replaced, super easy. There's a lot of slack, there's a lot of room, so it's not going to be a headache for John next time he's out here, or for the next technician. So thank you to John, thank you to Godina Septic, and thank you to Wholesale Septic Supply. If you need any effluent pumps, risers, panel boxes, they do offer bulk discounts to contractors. They have great warranty on all of their products. So go visit them at wholesale-septic-supply.com. Give them a call. Tell them Poor Pumper Society, John Godina Septic sent y'all. And that's the video. Peace.